All right, everyone. Well, I'm Caitlin. I'm the financial literacy manager at UBT, and we're going to be talking about, again, another basic financial literacy topic, which is establishing credit and increasing your credit. So, establishing credit is really important at your age to just start thinking about it if you haven't already. But I'm going to talk about ways to establish and increase credit that won't get you into debt, which I think a lot of people end up doing over time. So we'll go from there. Feel free to ask questions. Feel free to leave your cameras on too if you'd like to. But I'm going to make sure that y'all stay muted unless you're going to specifically ask a question just for the sound of this. So. All right, so let's talk about what credit is. So credit in general, all of us are going to have a score one day. We start out with 0 or no score. But credit is your ability to borrow money, goods, or service with the understanding that you'll pay it back. So credit score, everyone is issued a number and it goes up and down. The lowest you could have is 0. The highest you could have is like 800. And the point system is based off your ability to pay your bills on time, without skipping anything, and how much debt you have compared to your income. So this score that everyone will have really tells other people, like loan lenders, if you can or can't borrow money. The higher the score, the more you are appealing to like a bank, because the higher the score, the more that says, sure, you can give them a loan and they'll pay it back. So it's just your ability to borrow money and pay it back. So it is a big deal, but I am one to say that it's not as big of a deal as a lot of people want to make it, especially at a very young age. I think that there's a lot of false information out there that says that you need to establish credit right away, and you don't. But if you do feel like that's what's best for you, there's ways to establish credit without going into credit card debt. Credit is not based on just credit cards, excuse me. So you can build credit in other ways, and that's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about how you establish credit. Okay. So there's a couple ways that you can establish credit, and your credit is tied to your social security number. So you have a social security number, and the moment you start doing any of the things that feed into the credit bureaus, which are the basically the big companies that keep track of your credit score, that's when your score is established. So there's one way to establish a credit score without getting into a lot of debt. So not taking on a major credit card or something like that, which is what's called a secured credit card. So secured credit card is just like any other credit card, but basically you're going to put the money down in cash prior to getting the card. So let's say I wanted to have a $500 limit on my credit card. I could go to the bank with $500 cash and say, here, you take my $500 and you give me a credit card. And every month I can spend on this card, and then I'm gonna have to pay it back because they're gonna bill me. But when I'm done with the credit card, I take it back to the bank and I say, okay, I'm done with this. Maybe it established your score as you wanted it, and they'll give you your $500 back. And what this really does, the secured card, is it takes the liability of you being a risky person because you haven't had a credit score. It takes it off the bank. So it's just like when you go get an apartment, you have to put down a deposit, a security deposit. That's essentially what this credit card does. You're putting down a security deposit. So if anything goes wrong, the bank is just going to keep your money to pay back what you owed. So some people will get secured credit cards and they'll rack up, let's say, $350, and they won't pay it off. And the bank has to close it because they defaulted, but they'll keep $350 of that $500 and send you back the $150. So it takes the risk off of the bank. And this is a really good idea because you don't need a credit score to get this credit card, where in any other credit card, you do need a credit score. So this is where young people that are starting to establish credit, you can go in there. I think some banks have a limit. You have to have at least 500 or 300, but it's a smaller amount. So if you just came up with $300 in cash, you could go get a credit card and start building your credit. And you're learning how to pay the bill every month and things like that. So this is a really safe way to do credit cards. A lot of adults with great credit still use secure credit cards because it's taking the risk off of the bank. And it keeps you in check because you want your money back at the end of your secured credit card journey. So not all banks offer a secured credit card. UBT does, but not all banks do. So you're going to want to look ahead if you decide to go this route. But this is a great option. This is the number one option I suggest to people at a young age if you're trying to build credit, is to do a secured credit card because it's safe and you don't have to have credit to start it. Another way to establish credit is to be a cosigner or get a cosigner. So a cosigner is somebody that's going to sign up for whatever product you're getting with you. So if you want to get a car loan, and let's say you don't have credit or you have low credit because you're still pretty new at this, a cosigner would be somebody else that has good credit that will sign on the loan with you to say, hey, if Lily doesn't pay on this, I will. That's what cosigners do. So what this does for you is that you're on the loan. So anything that gets, so any payment that's paid is reported in your name. So it's a great way to establish credit because you have somebody else kind of backing you up. But I caution anybody who wants to be a cosigner for someone else, even when you do have good credit, because if that person you're signing for does not pay their bills, it falls on you to do it. And so a cosigner is equally responsible for the loan that they're getting. And so like my school loans, for instance, I have undergrad school loans and my dad co-signed for them because I was 20 years old. But so if I decided not to pay my school loan back, he would be responsible and it would ruin his credit along with mine. So you have to be really careful that you never co-sign for someone that's unreliable, because if they decide to not pay, then you're essentially, you are stuck with it and it could ruin your credit at the same time. So cosigners are a good way to establish credit if you're getting some like a credit card or a loan, if they're willing to do so. But I would not have a cosigner if you're just not going to pay your bills. That's not fair to them. So be really careful, if you ever decide to cosign too. But that's a good way to establish credit. Other ways to establish credit. High interest loans. So this is like from car dealerships, smaller ones, private ones. They charge higher interest, but they're more willing to give a loan to someone if they don't have good credit or no credit at all. You'll hear it on commercials like, we approve anyone, no credit or bad credit. That's a good way, but you are going to pay a lot higher interest. So it's not always a great decision. So you want to be really careful with that. Your phone bill, not many people realize if your name is on your phone bill, it is reported to the credit bureau. So if you have the cell phone, say on a family plan, if you could get your name on that bill as a part of it, then it's being reported in your name too. So even if you're not responsible for the bill, if your parents or your family are willing to put your name on that as a main person, then that will help your credit. Household bills like utilities, those are reported to the credit bureau upon request. So if you move into an apartment and are paying your heat and your water and things like that, you can call that facility and say, I want this reported to my credit bureau. And they will report that. It takes some time to get it done, but they can do it. They have the capacity to do it. So this is also a great way to establish credit if you have bills in your name, just like utilities. I will say that the only way this is going to help you, though, is if you pay your bill on time every time. So if you're going to get things reported in your name to your credit score, to the credit bureaus, then you need to make sure that you are paying your bills on time. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Be an authorized user on someone else's credit card. I see this a lot with parents that are trying to teach their teens good credit habits, and they'll put their teen's name on their credit card. So the teen will get the credit card and it'll say Caitlin Moore on it, and they can use it, but it's under their parents' name. So this is a way that you could do that too if you have somebody that's willing to make you an authorized user. So giving you the allowance to say, I can swipe this credit card. It will be reported in your name also. Store credit cards, though they're not my favorite, they are an easier way to get a hold of credit. So say department stores, Walmart, Target, Old Navy, things like that, Shields. Most of the stores that we all typically go to on a regular basis have a credit card, and they are more willing to give it to more people. And so you don't have to have credit, or you don't have to have high credit in order to qualify for that. It's a lot easier to get store credit cards, but it could get you into a lot of trouble. I have worked with a lot of clients that have a lot of store credit cards. I worked with one that had about 18 store credit cards. So, and these are like clothing stores. So it's not like she's going all the time. She just had these credit cards for everything, but now she's making 18 different payments to 18 different stores. And that could be really hard on the budget. If you choose to go the store credit route,
disconnect.
What's that? Oh. Okay. If you choose to go the store credit route, one thing I would suggest you thinking about is to take out one card and do it at the store that you go to the most. Okay. So if you're responsible for grocery shopping, pick a store that you go grocery shopping at. So let's think a big box store. We'll say Walmart. They have a credit card, and typically we go to Walmart because we're buying a little bit of everything there. You can get anything you need at Walmart. And so that's a store that we're going to frequent a little bit more. So you could take your budget for food and put it on your credit card, but then just pay off your credit card with your budget. So that's one way that people use store credit cards to build up their credit. I would not suggest doing store credit cards if you do not have a budget, because the best way to use store credit cards is to spend the money on the credit card and then pay it off immediately. So if you don't have a budget to do that, then it's not really a good idea, because now you're going to be in debt. And we don't want to use the credit cards for debt. We want to use credit cards to help build our credit. So store credit cards are a way to establish credit or to build up our credit, because it is easier credit to get a hold of, but it's not always a good idea. Secured loans are the same thing as a secured credit card. So this is a loan that the bank, it's kind of weird. I had to ask about this, but say you needed a $5,000 loan, you would bring $5,000 in cash to the bank in order to get this loan. Now, my question was, why in the world would you need a loan if you have the cash? Why would you want to give the bank your $5,000 in cash for them just to give you a loan? That doesn't make sense. A lot of people do that just to build up their credit. They literally will just go do that to build up the credit, so that they could pay it back and have a better credit score at the end of that. And then getting your bills on your credit report. So like I said, with the household bills, but you could do this with some other things like your phone bill, if it's not already being reported, or if there's other things that you have. Sometimes apartment managers will report your rent to credit bureaus. Not all of them do. It's a good question to ask when you are looking for an apartment. If you choose to go that route, ask if they report it to your credit bureau, because it could be in your favor. If you pay on time every time and it's being reported, it will build up your score. So it's a good thing to do. Some apartment managers just don't want to deal with that. Maybe there's too many tenants or something like that, but it's worth asking. So that's another way. Any questions so far? Okay. I'm going to take a drink here. Okay. So let's talk about how to increase your credit score. Okay. So like I said, everyone starts off with no credit. And then once you start the credit journey, whether it's through a credit card or a store credit card or a loan or a cosigner, anything like that, you're going to start building up a score. And the way that you build up a score is, number one, pay your bills on time every time, and don't take out too much money where you're in debt. Those are huge, huge pieces of the puzzle. So let's say you have a credit score, but it's not what you want it to be. And there's a lot of information out there. There's three main credit bureaus that you can check your credit score from: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Those are the main credit bureaus. They might have your score a little bit different depending on how they do things. But those are the ones that are keeping track of it. And this is for everyone. And so if you look at that score, most of them have a measurement of what is good or excellent or bad. So bad, good, excellent. And it's a range in the numbers. So typically from like 650 to 700 or 630 to 700, it's considered good credit. 700 to, I think it's 760-ish. It's, what is it? Excellent credit. And then anything above that is just, I don't know, magnificent. It's really hard to get up that high. And so they all have a measurement. And so they'll give you a good idea of what is good. Anything below 600 is typically qualified as bad credit. And I always like to tell people that it's better to have no credit than it is to have bad credit. Because no credit means that you don't have debt, you're not taking out loans you can't pay back, you're just living off your budget. Whereas bad credit says you're not paying your payments on time, maybe you have too much debt, you're taking on too much, and you don't want to be looked at as that person who can't handle their money. It's better to just not have credit, especially if you're using cash for everything, you don't need credit. And so you can go on one of these sites every year and get your credit report for free, which if you do that, it's like over time, it'll be a whole stack of paper for you to look through or a PDF. But you'll see everything credit related that has ever been reported in your name. So if there's a late charge or collections on there or a missed payment, it's all going to be reported. And that's what lenders, so like car dealerships or banks or anybody that loans money, this is what they're going to look at to decide whether you're a good candidate to loan money to. So they're going to first look at your number. So if you come up as 630, they're going to go, okay, well, she's got good credit. Okay, but let's see why it's only good. Was it ever excellent and it's gone down? Or has it been 0 and it's up to good so far? So they're going to look at, well, she was late 3 times on her payment, or it's been 2 years since the last missed payment. So there's a lot of criteria that people look at, but they're going to have access to all of that. So it's always a good thing every year to pull your credit report. There is one website, annualcreditreport.com, that it's really easy to get your credit pulled. I always tell people do it once a year, make sure what's on there is yours. If there's any discrepancies, anything that shouldn't be on there, you can call one of those places, one of those credit bureaus, and fight it. They have got attorneys that will fight it for you. You don't have to take it on by yourself. So if there's any debt in there or credit cards that have been taken out in your name, you need to fight it because it shouldn't be on there. For example, my ex-husband pulled his credit report one time, and he noticed there was a ton of charges and ton of credit cards that were open in his name that he had never heard of. But what was weird is that their payments were always on time. It was actually helping his credit, but it wasn't his. What happened was it was reported in his social security number it was off by one number. And so the credit agency was able to figure this out, and it belonged to someone with a very similar name and a very similar social security number. And so they got it all off of his report. And the positive thing is that person was making their payments on time every time. So it was actually, it wasn't hurting his credit score, but they took it all off and boom, it was done. It was not a problem. So it wasn't that anything was taken out in his name. It was just reported wrong. So you want to make sure that those things are happening because it could really affect your credit score. And if there's a stolen identity, you're going to find out that way. So those are your main ones. If you go to get a loan somewhere, they might tell you, we pull from TransUnion or we pull from Equifax. So these are 3 companies that you're going to hear for the rest of your life when it has to do with credit, because these are the big wigs that kind of run the show for credit. So some ways to increase your credit score when you do have credit. There's a couple ways here. So pay off any debt and collections ASAP. So it's really important that you don't let your bills go into collections. The biggest one that usually does is medical debt. So if you go to the doctor and you forget to pay the bill, I hear all the time, people move and they don't tell their doctor because they don't think about it. So the doctor's not the one that people typically think about because we can't use them anymore. So we just forget about it. But there may be a bill that you forgot to pay. And so that doctor's office does not know how to get a hold of you. And so the bill ends up in collections. It's an honest mistake, but it ends up in collections. Well, the collections charges are the worst for your credit score, like really bad, and they'll make it plummet. The great thing about collections, though, is once they're paid off, It takes about a month for it to be reported to your credit bureau. And then when it's taken off, your credit score just skyrockets. It makes a huge difference to pay off collections debts. So if you have collections, pay them off as fast as you can, but then make sure things aren't going into collections in the future because it will affect your credit. And when people pull your credit, they're going to say, oh, Caitlin had a collections debt, a year ago. And they might ask me, like, what happened with this? And I'll have to explain. And if it's an honest mistake, then it's easy to explain. But the bank has to trust me in what I'm saying too. So there's extra things that have to come into play when you're still trying to get a loan. So I would say just stay at a collections, just pay your bills. I have a whole lesson on collections. If anybody ever has questions, I'm really good at that stuff because there's ways to get around paying the whole thing. You can negotiate. There's just a whole bunch of things you can do. So, but just pay that one off as fast as possible. And then another way to increase your credit, make payments on time every time. That's kind of the mantra here, on time every time, because late payments are reported and they do affect your credit. They may not affect it a bunch, but if you have 50 late payments, your score is going to go down. So we need to be making those on time. Maxed out credit cards should be paid down at least 30 to 50%. So here's an example with this. Let's say you have $1,000 budget on it. Balance on a credit card. So the most you could spend is $1,000 and you've maxed that out. And so you're just making payments at this point because you can't spend any more on it. If you can pay it down to about $300 to $500, that's on the card still that you owe, that's actually a really good place to build your credit because that's telling the credit bureau, you have $1,000 you can spend, but you're only spending half of it. So if you could get it paid down to just half and spend a little, pay it off, spend a little, pay it off, it's a really good way to build your credit. Now you're still being charged interest for that credit card. So if you could pay it off, that's even better. I don't want you to sit with a balance that you're not paying and being charged interest for that. But if you can't pay it all off at once, it's a good thing to at least get it down to halfway. But if you do pay it off, and can spend a little, then pay it off again, spend a little, pay it off again. That's called revolving credit. And credit bureaus love revolving credit. It means you're taking advantage of the credit that you have, but you have enough money to pay it off. So one of the ways I've heard a lot of people say, if you have a credit card, go buy gas on it and then pay it off because you have a budget for gas. So just pay that off at the end of the month. If you're not very responsible with your credit, and you know that you'll overspend, maybe you just don't spend on your credit card. Just leave it paid off. You don't have to spend it. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to spend it. So you have to do what's best for you when it comes to your credit, but credit bureaus and your credit score love when you'll spend a little, pay it off, spend a little, pay it off. So if you have $1,000 limit, but you can't afford to spend more than $100 on it, that's okay. Go spend $100 and then pay it off because that will help. But paying it off is really key. And then paying down a maxed out credit card to about 50% is really good too. That will boost your credit score rapidly. So if you're looking for a quick fix, that's a good way to do it. Another way, which I hate telling people, and I don't suggest doing that, but if you have $1,000 limit on your credit card and it's maxed out, you can actually call your credit card company and ask them to increase your credit limit. So you could say, can you increase it to, let's say, $2,000? And they're going to see if you qualify and they'll run your credit and things like that. But if they'll increase it to $2,000 and you owe $1,000, now you're back at that magic 50%. So it's another way to increase your credit score. But this is why I don't like telling people to do this, because if you were at a point where you maxed out your credit card, and you can't pay it off, giving yourself more credit is not going to help because you're likely to spend that money too. So if you can't do it, don't. It's not a good reason to do it, but it will help you if you're looking for a way to increase. Okay, so be patient when increasing your credit score. It does take time. It takes a lot of time, and your credit score is a reflection of your whole life, your whole adult life. So sometimes it'll be not so good and sometimes it'll be great, depending on whether you have new credit cards or you take out a mortgage or a car loan and how fast you're paying it off. And even how much you make during the year is going to be will affect your credit score, because if I make more than I have in debt, then it looks really good. But if I have more debt than I make, then it doesn't look very good. So your credit score will always be like an up and down thing as you get older. So just know that increasing your score, it really does take time. So do what you can when you can. So pay off what you can, lower limits as you can. One of the things I do want to add to increasing your credit limit, we talked about in the last slide, that you can call and increase it. You can also call to decrease it. So if you find that you have too much credit, I know somebody that has like a $10,000 credit card. I was just talking to her recently, and she goes, I don't need $10,000 in credit. That's just crazy to me. And I told her, well, you could call and ask the credit card company to lower it to 5,000 or 2,000, whatever you need, so that you're not overspending. You're not spending more than you can afford. So that is something you can also do if you feel like you're just not good with credit and you don't want to be. I'm one of those that if it's available to me, I'm going to spend it. So I actually don't. I have like one credit card and I pay it off every month. I've just had to learn, because I went into massive credit card debt in college, that doesn't work for me. And so I make sure that I don't have that much available to me, because I would rather use cash so I don't go into debt. So it's just something that I've learned about my personality. So whatever works for you, that's what you should do. It does take about 3 to 6 months to rebuild your credit when you close a credit card, which I'm a big fan of. If you're trying to build your credit score back up and you have a bunch of credit cards, close the ones you're not using. Get rid of them. It will lower your score, but it will bump it up massively at the end of 3 to 6 months. So it might your number will go down because you closed it. Credit bureaus do not like it when you close credit, but after 3 to 6 months, it will go up a lot. So if you have those store credit cards, like the lady with 18 credit cards, she's closing them as she pays them off. She's closing every single one of them, because she said, I don't want this many. I overspend and I can't afford to do it anymore. But she's aware that it will lower her credit score, but it will go back up in a while. So just because it lowers it doesn't mean it will be like that forever. Some important steps to take: make sure your current payments are done on time every time, all your bills. Don't sign up for any more credit cards. That is not a good way to build your credit. It won't build your credit by having too many credit cards. And actually, the lady who had the 18 credit cards had a pretty low credit score because she had way too much debt compared to what she made. So she couldn't afford to pay things off. And the credit bureau knew that. So she actually had a bad score because she had too many credit cards. So don't think that taking out another credit card is going to help you. It's not. And then pay off your debt as soon as possible. Ultimately, not having debt or having very little debt is going to help you in the long run. School loans, car loans, mortgages, all of the money that's lent to you is on your credit report. And so, like for me, I have school loans, and it feels like it's never going to get paid off. It's just one of those big old loans that I'll have for a long time. But the credit bureau looks at that and says, okay, she's got this debt for school loans, but this is how much money she makes. And it's a lot better. So as I pay down my debt, then I have less debt. And, the more money you make as your career goes on, the better that looks on your credit score. So just pay off your debt as soon as possible, and don't let things get into collections. But if you do, you could always call me and I'll help you out with that, because there is a way. Okay. So does anybody have any questions? This is kind of a lot of information about credit, and just like basic information too. There's a lot of information. And actually, if anybody has Credit Karma on their phone, it's an app. It's a really great app to use when you're learning how to handle credit. It's not going to give you your accurate number. It's going to be different than the real number, but it's pretty close. But they give really great tips on Credit Karma about how to increase your credit by your own spending habits. So I looked at a tip the other day for me, and it was about my car loan. And they said, if you make a payment of an extra like $7 a month, maybe this was my mortgage, so my house. Yeah, they said if you make a $7 increase payment a month, you'll take off 7 months worth of payments by just increasing it by $7 a month, which I thought was quite fascinating because they're doing the math for me. So they really do give some great tips if you're just learning how to handle credit. They'll say, if you pay off this much, you'll save this much in the long run in interest and things like that. So that's a really great way to get some info. So is there any questions from anyone? Okay, we are good. I did record this, so I will get this back to you all so you guys can watch it on YouTube unless you, in case you want to get some more info or refresh. And then ubt.com on our YouTube channel, we have a ton of videos like this of different topics too, if you're looking for some other topics. But I do financial coaching for free. You don't have to be a customer of UBT. So if you need some help building a budget or working with collections or building your own credit, I can help you with that with one-on-one meetings. We could do it over webinars, or I can meet in person. I meet clients at Scooters all the time for this. So I'm here for you if you're just trying to get a handle on your money or learn how to do things a little better. That's what I'm here for. So that's it. So thank you everyone for your time.